Hello and welcome to a review of the new 5e D&D Player's Handbook. I'm going to be talking about some of the changes they've made to it with the new edition, what I think about it, why I think they've changed some of the things that they have, and what I generally think about the direction that the game is going. How I constructed this video was very simple. I pretty much went back to the first version of the Player's Handbook, read back through it again, then read through the new one, put them side by side, compared and contrasted, did some of my own thinking about the various parts of each, and now I've got the new one open in front of me, and I'll just be going through and talking about what I think about it. I wanted to read, first of all, the 2024 version sort of mission statement they include with the book, just so that we know what the intention of it is. Because it would be bad if we went in and we thought, hey, the book isn't doing this, the book isn't doing that, and all the while it's not their intention to do any of those things. So let's read that to just figure out what the point of this is. Why are they doing this? Why have they released this book? So here's what they say: streamlined rules, easier character creation, enhanced classes, reimagined origins, expanded feats, upgraded weapons, tools, and crafting, and dazzling spells. So before we get into the more in-depth review of the book, I did want to just address these big ticket items. Streamlined rules, I would actually say this has not been achieved. In fact, we've taken a step backwards. There is so many more rules in this book. Just look at the page count. This one's much, much higher. There's about 1 million new combat rules, many new races, many new subclasses. If anything, I think there are more rules than there's ever been. Now, there is a rules glossary, and I think what they mean by this statement is that they have provided more easily accessible definitions of the rules, not really that they have streamlined the rules into more efficient rules, but rather that they have just provided the definitions for them. I don't really think of that as true streamlining, but kind of just adding, because a lot of people sort of implicitly knew those rules in the old book and then could choose whether or not to use them since they weren't rules as written. Or if they were rules as written, they weren't in the base Player's Handbook, they were in other books, and you could sort of, pick and choose what you wanted to add and what you didn't, care for in your game. So for streamlined rules, I don't really think that's been achieved here. Easier character creation. I think this has definitely been achieved. The character creator is a lot easier, but I think at the same time, there have been some missteps there with the book's formatting, and I'll get into that when we get into the more in-depth review. But basically, I think that the art they've included and the style that they've chosen to present the races with is actually a lot better than the original. I think it's better for making characters in that section, but again, I do have some problems with it, which are sort of minor, which we'll get into later. Enhanced classes. Now, there have been some changes to the classes. They're pretty minor, mostly formatting stuff, some additions. All the Tasha, or not all the Tasha stuff, but a lot of the Tasha stuff is here. There's some Unearthed Arcana stuff that they decided to go with. They have expanded all of the classes, so I think that one pretty definitionally true. Reimagined origins. This is now, origins are basically a combination of backgrounds and race. I have some thoughts about this that are more complicated, but for the most part, I feel that origins are a good thing. I think they did pretty good with that, but I wouldn't say this is a great new addition. It's just okay. Expanded feats. This is the uncomplicated one. There's a lot more feats. They look great to me. Yeah, it's just awesome. I think a lot of them are from Tasha. I think there's some new ones. I have not read like every single feat in Tasha and every single feat in this book to compare them. I think there are some new ones. They all look great. Upgraded weapons, tools, and crafting. This section looked pretty similar to me to how I run things on a baseline. I thought those were the rules. They have put some more details in about just what you can craft with each thing. I thought a lot of that was pretty intuitive, but it's not a bad addition. This is a lot like the Reimagined Origins for me. It's not an amazing new addition, but it's okay. It's good. Dazzling spells. Another uncomplicated one. I think the spells are great. I have no problem with them. I think they're a great addition. Okay, so with those points out of the way, let's go into the in-depth review. And I'm starting off on page 1. I know, I'm doing it. I've already got a complaint, and it's a big one. This is probably my biggest complaint actually in the book. And it's not a deal breaker at all. I don't think this is like a, this book is terrible, don't buy this book thing. But I do think it's a big misstep. This book begins with Welcome to Adventure, and it describes the creation of D&D, describes what you need, describes, using how to use the book, the world of adventure. I don't think this is a good move. A PHB, Player's Handbook, needs to have character creation front and center. That is why people are buying this book. They're buying it to see the new character creation options. There are other things people will buy it for, but that is the number one reason. And so it should be the first thing in the book. And if you find this opinion controversial, just look in the original and that's how it's formatted. And there's a reason they did that. The reason is because when you open a book and you don't immediately see character creation, you're looking around with it and you're going to get upset pretty fast, or your players will. Imagine if you're a new player, you're in the book, you got to look at an index to find where this stuff is. If you're not super familiar with RPGs, you're going to be like, man, this is a hassle. With the old Player's Handbook, you open the book, bam, there it is, right there. There's the Brunor example of how to make a character. It's perfect. This history of D&D's creation is the first thing in the book. That's great as like a deluxe celebration kind of thing. I think that's cool. But the thing is, like, functionally, that's not a very good idea because your first page of your book is taken up by something you only need to read once. You never need to read this again. You never need to open the book and read that description again because, it's not a gameplay mechanic. So I think that the first thing in the book should be the thing you're going to use the most, which would be, of course, character creation. Okay, now that we've gotten past that extremely nitpicky thing, I'm actually going to, move past the first page and we're going to really talk about the book. And I'll put up a counter in the top right of the video where I'll have like the page number I'm on so you can follow along if you want, or if you want to look at what I'm looking at while I'm talking about. So we're looking at Chapter 1, Playing the Game. So the first section on playing the game, there is a lot more words here. It's just kind of bigger. There's a lot more explanation of the nuances of how to play the game. There's some more description of how to DM, exactly how proficiency works, advantage and disadvantage. This is pretty good. I think this is a good addition. A lot of this stuff I did when I started first playing the game when I was a teenager. I had to look up a lot of this stuff. So it's good that it's now in the book. We do live now in the internet age, and so you can, in a lot of places, reasonably expect someone to have internet and be able to look things up. But, you're selling a product that should be complete, and so it's good to have this info all collected here. I'm especially glad they have actions and reactions explained here in depth right at the front of this chapter. While I still think it would be great to have character creation here, these two things confused me more than anything else, the action economy, when I was a teenager, and it's great they're here. The combat step-by-step part, I really like this. The new kinds of combat, the mounted combat, underwater combat, all these like new rules for this. I'm going to say something that I think might be a little bit controversial. I don't think this should be here. I don't think it should be in the book. And the reason I say that is because these things are somewhat uncommon situations. Usually, when you think of an adventuring party, it's 4 dudes on foot in a dungeon fighting a monster. It's usually not mounted, it's usually not underwater. Of course, there are many campaigns that do that, many exceptions, but I'd say 75% of the time you're in a dungeon on foot. Having specified rules for this, I think, kind of takes out the ability of interpretation on the part of the DM. Now, of course, if the DM doesn't want to use any of this, they don't have to. Nobody's forcing them to. But I do think it makes the game more of a game and less of a creative process. The more you define the rules, the more you make it like a traditional game. Board games, of course, you can't make up new rules in most board games. It's just you play the game the way it is supposed to be, and then you win or lose the game. For Dungeons and Dragons, of course, there's a lot more leeway, there's a lot more imagination, and that's part of what makes the game so great. So I think having more and more rules like this for, let's be honest, pretty specific forms of combat that players don't get into that much, it's not the best. I think that it's starting to go a little too far for me. Now, I don't think this is, again, a deal breaker. I don't think this book is terrible, but I would rather it not be there or be less prominent, because if this stuff was in the original PHB, I never saw it. We now come to Chapter 2, Creating a Character. This should be Chapter 1, I contest. I like that it has talk with your DM first. This is just, I just like that they have that. It's very accurate. Love the art by the side of this page as well. It's really cool. They've got this old temple with these unicorn carvings on it and a dragon and these little goblins. There's a jar mimic. It's a really cool piece of art. We got to talk about it though. The big problem, they got to choose a class here. There's no artificer. Why is artificer not in this book? Like, actually, why is it not in this book? I do not understand why Artificer's got to stay out in the cold while everybody's having a nice party in chapter two. I do not understand why it's not here. I think Artificer was an extremely popular class. All of my players loved it and use it all the time and talk about it all the time. Whenever we're talking about D&D classes, of course. And I see people talk about it a lot online. People seem to really enjoy it. And I just don't get why it's not here. Like, Artificer is not just a thing in Eberron, like it's in other settings. A lot of them really you can think have artificers. The world of Final Fantasy VII, you could easily say that Mako is the product of artificers. I feel like this is not that uncommon and it should be in the main book. And again, this 2024 book, they've been taking stuff out of Tasha, out of Xanathar. So you can't really make the argument that it's supposed to be a beginner guide and Artificer. It's not a major archetype for magic users because this is kind of supposed to be like a big collection. It's got all the rules, a bunch of new classes. It's like a compendium, but it doesn't include one of the most fan favorite classes, I think. It might be that I'm misjudging the popularity of the Artificer. Tell me in the comments if that's true, if you think that Artificer is not really that popular, because I'd be interested to know, actually. The new character sheet, I don't like it as much as the old one. Part of that's probably nostalgia, but I wouldn't say that I have an incredible amount of nostalgia for the old character sheet, because I would usually just print out a Google Doc. This one, as I'm looking at it again now, I kind of like it. It's got a sort of snazzy looking design, but it's a little too high fantasy for me. It's got all these clean lines, clean angles. It's got these sort of sci-fi looking orbs at the center, or sorry, at the sides of text box. These sort of elven looking designs, sort of graceful. I'm not as much of a fan of that. I like D&D with sharp angles, sharp objects, sharp I don't know, whatever else you can, sharp ears, elves, there you go. So I do like these sort of squares they have, or maybe they're like diamonds, I guess you could say. I do like those on the second page for cantrips and prepared spells. I do think the heroic inspiration is a little too prominent on the sheet here. It's like a big thing right next to the stats. Like proficiency bonus, that makes sense. That should be there. But like heroic inspiration, like someone got a promotion, I guess. It is actually goaded though that they have the hit points separated into current temp and max. Oh my God, I had so many problems with this with my players, the old character sheet. This was constantly a problem back before we used to play online. So I'm so glad to see this. To be honest, I don't see people using this a lot. I think they'll probably just do, a fraction like a lot of people I played with did. They would just, instead of having your max somewhere, you would just write so and so hit points out of however many you have. So I think that's probably what people will still do because it's just easier. But it's nice to have. And I think some people will use it and will get a lot of benefit out of it. Having your spell cast ability be written on the second page, that's a little weird to me, but I don't really play spellcasters, so maybe that's cool. I don't really have a strong opinion on it. I do think that the coins should be on page one, but it's not a big deal to me. I do like that they slimmed down the name, background, species, class, subclass section. I think it was a little big on the old sheet, and I think it's a lot better now. I do have one thing. This is really personal choice. Like, I don't really have a great reason for this. I just think hit points should be before armor class. I don't know. I don't know why it isn't. I feel like armor class is not as important as hit points, and hit points should be before. I do like these prompt questions on the next page of like who raised you, who was your dearest childhood friend. I actually ask questions just like this when players are sort of stuck in character creation, and they're great. Yeah, this is a great addition. The multi-class spellcaster table they have here, I think it's a good addition. I never actually wondered about this before. I implicitly understood what they explain here that you determine your spellcasting level by adding them together. I already understood that. But, it's good to have. I think it will be good to clarify for people who didn't assume that. So now we are to chapter 3, character classes. Just looking down the lineup here, checking one more time. There are no new classes in here. I don't really know how I feel about that. There are many new subclasses, but it does not seem like they have put any of the new classes that have been in other books in here. Again, Justice for Artificer. Looking at the page for Barbarian, you see first this great art on the left. I think all the classes get this. I'm just going to check really quick. Yeah, they all get these beautiful full page arts on the left hand. So good. Great. I love that they're doing that. The old way they were doing it with them off kind of to the side with like a quote right next to them. It was good, but it wasn't perfect. This seems a lot better. This is a big improvement. The little table they have to the side of it also looks great. Again, it does look a bit graceful, sort of elven, the actual design of it, which I'm not as much a fan of, but I do like the layout a lot, and it is an improvement objectively. I like that they have level one and then the ability. I think that's a better way to do it than the old book. And I do like that they also list becoming a barbarian and then like the two things that you have to do for that class are becoming, whatever class it is, not just barbarian, of course. And then they have the two things you have to do at character creation. Because before it was like quick create or something. It was like called like quick create a member of this class and then all the stuff you need to do. And that was kind of weird for me and a lot of other players I had because people would be like, well, is there like a slow create or like what does that mean? It never really became a big problem, but it's better this way. They've added a lot more subclasses to this book. Of course, I like that. They also have the spell lists with the class. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy about that. I remember people being just so annoyed with having to like look through the book back to this, spell list, back to the other thing. What we used to do with my players, we'd have two of the player handbooks, one with the spell list and one with the class next to it. And oh my God, that was so painful to have to do, right? Like you would just want why do you need two books for this? Geez. Oh my gosh, such a big improvement. I love that they did this. There is one negative I wanted to talk about here with the classes, and it's more of a general thing. So I want to read you a description and sort of talk about why I think it represents a bit of a problem with this book. And this is in the Ranger section under level 2. Deft Explorer. Thanks to your travels, you gain the following benefits. Expertise. Choose one of your skill proficiencies with which you lack expertise. You gain expertise in that skill. Very simple description. The thing is, it used to be for expertise, right? It would say like you get double proficiency with that thing and it would explain what it is. As I'm filming this video, if you look up expertise 5e, the first thing you get is like a question thread about what it is. And I think this shows a bit of a problem with the way that this book is written. This book is written in a very good way for online. So like you would see this, you do Control F, you search for expertise, you find the definition, now you know what you get as a ranger. And that way the book can be organized where they don't have to explain that every single time because it's redundant on an online document. But when you have a physical book like I do, and like many people do, it's better to have that explained because if you turn around and you show that to a new player or to a player who hasn't read this a million times, they're going to be like, what is that? And then they're probably just going to look it up because, it's hard to find things like that in a big book and people aren't as familiar with how to use an index anymore. I'm sorry to say that, but it's the truth. People are better at searching now on the internet than searching through an index. That's not as strong a skill with a lot of people as it once was in the past. That's not to say people can't understand an index, but again, they're probably going to go with what's faster. They're just going to look it up. So it's better if it's just in the description. And this is the case for a few things throughout here. Like another one is your fighting style. Now you're like, it's the fighting feats basically. You go to those and you've got to go to a different section to find all the stuff. Now, this is the opposite of what I praised about the spells, right? It used to be you'd have to get two books out or go to a different section to find all the spells. Now they've put them with the classes. So it feels like they didn't quite commit to that all the way because now some of the stuff that was right there in the old book, they moved it to a different section. So, I don't really like that. I think that it should be with the class or with what it's with because people don't want to flip around the book endlessly just for a tiny description. And For big things, of course, you have to do that. You can't have a giant break in a class to talk about some feature. But something like expertise being a double proficiency, that's not a big thing. You can explain that. You can have some redundant text there, and it will help everyone out. Small redundancies like that help players because it makes the information available on more pages without really detracting from the quality of those pages because it's just such a small inclusion. And again, a lot of this stuff was present in the old PHP, and I really liked it for that. I do love that there is now art for, it looks like to me, pretty much every subclass. That is actually impressive and great. That is such a great feature of this because in other books, there might not be a picture of that member of the class, or sometimes there would be, but it would just be like a pendant, or it would just be like from the waist up or something. So seeing how these ones are done with all of them like in portraits right next to it, they don't have to label them like they had to do with they have to do sometimes in other books. It's great. I think it's such a great change. And they've also got some psionic subclasses now. People have been asking for those for a while. And well, I don't think they were quite as unique as people were hoping. They're not really like that first Unearthed Arcana that we got that everyone got really excited about. They're good. I do think they could have gone a bit farther and made them a bit weird because that's sort of what psionic classes are about. They're supposed to be unique from magic classes, and I wish that was expressed more in their design. So we now come to chapter 4, character origins. So before we get into probably what will be the most controversial part of this video, I'm just going to quickly say, love what they did with the backgrounds, having them have choices now and art for every single one. So great. I am so glad to see that because for so many years it would just be like you'd have to imagine it yourself or look it up again. But having all of these with the D&D theming, like they all have sort of hints of D&D lore in them, like there's a beholder balloon in the charlatan one, there's this sort of giant sundial in the acolyte one that looks very Dungeons and Dragons-y. There's a painting of a tiefling and artisan. This kind of stuff is great because it'll really get people's imaginations going and has for me. Now let's get to the big hot take I am going to have for this video. And feel free to disagree with this. I wouldn't say I have a super strong opinion, but I do have an opinion. The change of name from race to species. So here's my thing. When people talk about fantasy races, they talk about fantasy races. They don't talk about fantasy species. That's not usually what they say. Now, some people will, and I'm sure you have examples of that, but this is not the terminology that people use to describe dwarves, elves, dragonborn, whatever. They use the word race. And what I want to do really quickly is talk about what I think the intention of this was, because I think that Wizards of the Coast should try to improve the game over time and make it better over time. I think everyone would agree with that. They should try to do that. And I wonder if this is improving the game. Is it improving the game or is the intention something else? And I think it's something else. I think that the reason that they renamed races to species and they put it as part of Origins instead of its own section is out of fear. I think that they were afraid of getting some kind of backlash. I'm not even sure who would be upset with that, but maybe someone would. And I think that's why they changed it to species. And that kind of sucks because this was not a change made to better the game. It was a change made out of fear. It's like that scene, if y'all remember, in like one of the Harry Potter movies where like Peter Pettigrew is talking to Voldemort, and Voldemort's like, out of fear, not loyalty. Remember that? Well, that's what I think happened here. I don't think they genuinely believed that this was morally correct or that it would improve the game. I think it was done because they were afraid. So pretty much everyone I know calls them fantasy races or magical creatures, right? Nobody ever refers to an elf as a mystical species or a fantasy species. That just doesn't happen really. So why would you make the moniker for them less intuitive? It's not just that I think the intention is bad and not the correct approach. I also think that the word species actually kind of does the opposite of make it more politically correct. When you see an elf, a dwarf, and a human, these are pretty much all just humans. Like, I'm short in real life, but so I'm basically a dwarf, right? I mean, and I'm not a different species from humans. That's very strange. When you have all your players and you offer them different races, that's not an opportunity for them to divide themselves. It's an opportunity to express themselves in different races together. Calling them different species actually makes them farther apart because you can have different races within a single species. Humans, of course. Humans have different races, but they're all one species. But saying that all of these races are different species makes them farther apart and less related to one another. It also brings a sort of genetic component to these races or species that is in this book. And so this whole thing, right, about, they're scared of getting called racist or whatever. The whole mission of that, right, is to bond people together and overcome intolerance. Separating people by calling an elf a different species or a dwarf a different species, that doesn't do that. That doesn't give people the idea of coming together. It gives them the idea of tearing apart. And so that kind of saddens me to see that out of fear, they did the exact opposite of the thing that they seemingly want to pretend like they're doing. I'm against this change. Again, it doesn't really bother me that much, and I don't feel super strongly like you need to change it back to race right now. If they kept it as species, I wouldn't be mad, but I think it was better as race. Those are my two reasons for it. I think the intention behind it is not the approach they should have. And I think it even does the opposite of the project that it would support should it have been done out of a true intention. As for the actual formatting of the races, I think it's great. Art of all of them, again, so great. This should have been in the first PHP. I understand that might not have been possible, so it's great to see it here. Every single race has art, every race is represented, and they finally have stats for the drow in the basic book. Hell yeah. Man, I cannot believe that took this long. Like, why were they not in the first book? And also these pieces of art are just so great and they represent each race just so well. Having the sub races be called lineages instead, I think is actually a positive change. So completely, contrary to my earlier rant, I actually think that lineage is a much better word than subrace because subrace, the word subrace is a lot less intuitively part of fantasy than is lineage. The word lineage is used all the time in fantasy stories and fantasy materials. And I think it's actually used much, much more often than subrace outside of role-playing games. And so for people to transition from fantasy novels and stories and other materials into role-playing games, I think it's great that they have them called lineages. And also it just sounds so much cooler, Either you're of the sub-race of the drow or you're of the lineage of the drow. Lineage is just so much better. It's got a much more epic sound to it, and it sounds less statistical. Subrace, it's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like an accountant would say that. Once again, though, I do have to say, I don't think they changed it because they thought it was a better name. I think they changed it out of fear. Now, in this case, that fear led to what I believe is a good change. But again, I don't think this should be their approach. Being afraid of people is not going to make a good product necessarily. Chapter 5, Feats. I don't have a lot to say about this one because it's just a great chapter. The feats are great. I love them. I love that there's more of them. They're awesome. I've said my opinion about like the fighting style feats should be listed with classes. Other than that, no problem with it. And having the feats listed by name and then category, oh my God, that is such a good idea. I never even thought about that. If it was that way in the original PHP, I missed it. But like, man, that's just such a good idea. The equipment chapter. I have a lot of nostalgia for this chapter in the old book, so I am going to have a lot of sort of subjective takes here. But I really liked the sort of outlines they had around the old style of it. The new chart, I think, is a lot better, and the comprehensive portraits they have of each weapon are pretty much inarguably better. I mean, these are great. Just looking at them all in front of you, you're like, you get excited about it, or at least I do. But yeah, I have a lot of nostalgia for the old one, but I can recognize that this one is objectively better. The armor one too. Oh my gosh, this is so much better. The old armor page was kind of like really bad. Even when I had the book in front of me, I'd usually go to an online source for like looking at the armors and stuff. Love the new tools section as well. The equipment section, the new one, I think is just great. Like it's really good. And finally, we move on to chapter 7, spells. Don't really have a lot to say about this one either. I think it's just a good section. The spell section isn't super flashy. It just, does what it needs to do. It's got some good art. And then actually, finally, the appendices, Appendix A, B, and C. Appendix A, I think, is pretty good. It has some multiverse stuff, has some sigil stuff. I really like sigil. I do think that the planescape stuff is getting a little much. I don't really like alternate planes. I don't use them a lot in my own games, but I think it's cool to have, and the art is always really good for them. It's like this really cool cosmological model. I always really like that stuff. And if you don't want to use those settings, of course, you can just not use them. So to me, this is pretty much a win. I was really surprised to see Appendix B with the creatures and stat blocks. That's pretty cool. I don't really know why it's in the player's handbook, probably for like familiars and pets and stuff. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't think it's super necessary since to play the game, you kind of still need the monster manual. But maybe that will change in the future. Maybe they'll just keep expanding that and eventually they'll just be one big book. I don't know. I haven't really thought that through completely, but could be interesting. And finally, the rules glossary. I absolutely love this. I feel like this should have been the first section of the book. Like, not this should have been first in the book, but the first section of the book should have just been this section, and they should have had character creation first. This thing is so great. Like, just looking through it, I mean, this is amazing. It gives all the rules here. It's got a great format. It's got those bold italics that they use, which I think are a really great formatting choice for D&D. Yeah, this is great. And finally, the index. Terrible. So bad, Wow. Wizards of the Coast really going downhill. Can't believe it. The index isn't color coded. Not JK. So yeah, that's pretty much my review of the book. I do like that there's this little wolf guy hanging out on the last page. He's pretty cool. I like him. I have the deluxe cover with the 50 on the back. I didn't get it on purpose. It was just the only one available at the store that I went to. And I think it looks really nice. The cover is great. It's a gold dragon. Looks like he's heating up some tea for some people. It's kind of cool. I think the old PHB cover was extremely good. Like with the giant and the ruby and all that. That was such a great cover. I think this one is also pretty good. It's got an actual dragon on it, so there you go. Dungeons and Dragons. And it is sort of coiled up, kind of like the ampersand. So yeah, I think it's really good. It does have again this sort of graceful design to it, which is interesting. I do tend to like a more like demonic, sort of scary, angular looking D&D style, but this is also really good. I also love that the barcode is like incorporated into the back. It's like in this nice little frame. I think that's a nice touch. So, with all of that said, 5e is moving towards a good place. I think that things are developing in a way that accounts for the modern age and for how the way that we consume media is changing. I do worry about a few things. The digitization stuff and not being able to download things in the format that you want, like just a basic PDF scan, and the subscription service, that rubs me the wrong way. I don't think that's going anywhere good. And this trend with the renaming of race to species, doing things out of fear will never earn you respect from people, and it will not make you a good product consistently. I think that they should make decisions instead to make the game better and to, promote inclusivity if that's their ideology and they want to do that. I think that's a noble goal, but again, it has to be paired with restraint. So yeah, other than those two things, a lot thicker, some good things, some bad things, but I would say overall an expansion, maybe an improvement, definitely an improvement in some ways. So that concludes my review of the book. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have thoughts about it that you'd like to tell me about, please put them in the comments. I'd love to know what you think of the book and what your impression of it is. And thank you for watching.